is a political science professor at SUNY Cortland out of Cortland, New York. Professor Spitzer, thank you so much for joining us here on this Friday night. We wanted to break down one of the top breaking stories today, and that's coming as the NRA has filed for bankruptcy. Now, the NRA has been just had so many legal, economic, PR woes in the past couple of years. So did you see this coming? Was this kind of foreseen?
Well, I'm not a bankruptcy expert by any means, but this, I will say, is probably the least surprising news story in the last month that I can think of. The NRA for the last several years has been gradually sort of imploding. And to a great degree, it's been a problem of their own making. And you already hit on a couple of the key elements of that. I mean, the NRA, of course, has suffered some political reversals in recent years, and that doesn't help them any. They have severe financial problems, which we can talk a little more about. They now have cascading legal problems directly related to their financial problems, and they have faced declining revenues and specifically declining membership. And nearly half of the NRA's annual budget is made up by membership dollars. So you bundle that stuff together, and it's the perfect storm that ties an anchor to this leaking ship, and it's rapidly sinking to the bottom, politically speaking and otherwise. So I can't say that it's a surprise. And this move to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a way, I think, to try and salvage some kind of organization. I think they're hoping to wall themselves out somehow, in some way, from the action ongoing with the New York Attorney General, Letitia James's office, because of the filing that they issued last summer. And that was an extremely damning document that listed in great detail the NRA's manifold examples of financial mismanagement.
And in New York, that case, from what I understand, the Attorney General there is looking to kind of strip the NRA of its 501c3 nonprofit status. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, the summons, the document, actually calls for the NRA to be dissolved. And that sounds like not only draconian, but a very extreme step, perhaps an overreach. But in fact, it is power that the New York Attorney General has and has had for several years. And in less well-publicized cases, the New York AG's office has gone after other organizations that have special tax benefits like nonprofits for, violating those laws, for squandering revenues that it receives, things like that. So I think that's part of what's at play here.
I see. And the NRA is the largest and the oldest organization for Americans who own guns. They're gun-owning Americans. They are obviously very pro-Second Amendment, but they're based in Virginia, even though they were incorporated in New York, and now they intend to kind of reincorporate in Texas. So are they essentially kind of fleeing all these areas and locations from their legal troubles, is it, in your view?
It sure sounds like that, absolutely. And obviously New York is part of the difficulty they face because, as you note, they were incorporated in New York. In fact, the NRA was created by two New Yorkers back in 1871. And so, interestingly enough, it began in what's now the liberal state of New York State. And that is the legal basis for the actions of the Attorney General, but they are now clearly contemplating abandoning their office in Fairfax, Virginia, where they have been for decades. And that also is something of a major step for the most obvious reason that it removes them from Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, in the 1970s, the old guard leaders of the NRA, who were more pro-hunting and sporting and recreational activities, not so much into the political side of things, had proposed moving the NRA's headquarters from then Washington, D.C., downtown Washington, to Colorado Springs. And that was one of the final straws that sort of broke the camel's back for the more political hardline people within the NRA, who in 1977 took over the organization from the old timers. And it was really ever since 1977 that the NRA has become more political, more extremist, more single issue, and it really set them on the path to where they are today politically. But the financial stuff is a whole nother ball of wax, and that's been gradually unspooling really for the last decade. Since 2009, the NRA's average revenues have increased by less than 1% each year, but their average expenditures have increased by over 6% every year for over a decade. And that by itself tells you that you can't operate in a fiscally sound manner with that going on, plus a lot of other things.
Can you explain to our viewers who Wayne LaPierre is, how much power he wields, and kind of how he is, one of the central targets and main focus of these financial problems? He has quite a large salary. He owns lavish homes, and there was a lot that came out in reporting that some of the financial improprieties are directly related to his spending on the organization. So kind of describe to us, who is a person like Wayne LaPierre and how much power does he wield?
Well, Wayne LaPierre came into the NRA in the 1980s as kind of a political functionary. He was not a gun guy, in point of fact, and he rose through the organization. He became the de facto leader of the NRA, the executive director, in the early 1990s. You might think of the president of the NRA as being the power, but the presidency of that organization is not the real power. That's a rotating position on a year-to-year basis. And Wayne LaPierre has been the power behind that organization for 30 years now. And his power was challenged first in the mid to late 1990s, but he beat back that challenge and retained power. But more recently, at the 2019 annual convention of the NRA, the then president, Oliver North, issued a memo that called for LaPierre's resignation, challenging his leadership, saying he had been squandering millions and millions of dollars of NRA money in a whole variety of ways, on everything from expensive men's clothing to numerous junkets to private resorts, hiring out private airplanes and all sorts of other things. And LaPierre fought back and instead forced, the board was still behind LaPierre, and forced out Oliver North instead. And we've seen a parade of other people, top leaders, lawyers, and other people leaving the NRA for the last couple of years, because increasingly responsible fiscal people within the NRA and some heavy donors, some large donors, have insisted that they won't participate or give any more money until such time as LaPierre was gone. And of course, he still heads the organization because he's been able to retain the loyalty of the majority of the board members. But he still controls the organization, and that is just not good.
Yeah, that was, I remember that pretty vividly, kind of that really messy divorce there amongst NRA leadership between LaPierre and Oliver North just a couple months ago. I just wanted to kind of go over some of the reaction we're getting. Wayne LaPierre sent this statement. He put it out on the website today to supporters and members of the group, saying essentially they're dumping New York. The Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted that, welcome to Texas, a state that safeguards the Second Amendment. In your view, though, the NRA is arguably one of the largest and most powerful lobbies in Washington. Every hard red Republican, proudly displays and proclaims their NRA rating from federal, state, and local office holders. Do you see what's happening to the organization as kind of a diminishment of that, political purchase and political power in Washington?
I think it does diminish their power. I think they've been badly wounded. And you can really chart that from 2016 to the present. If you think about back to the 2016 elections, the NRA spent a ton of money. They spent over $30 million on Donald Trump's presidential campaign. They spent over $70 million total on the whole campaign, which was triple what they had spent 4 years earlier. And, they're riding high because they were all in on Trump, and lo and behold, he won the election. So you'd figure they'd be sitting pretty, and they were for a little while. But the financial side of things began to hemorrhage out. Reporting emerged that suggested that at least some of the money that the NRA was funneling into the elections came from Russia, which would have been a plain violation of campaign finance law. And if you skip ahead, and then in 2018, the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, and a lot of candidates ran for office and were elected on a pro-gun safety platform. And that also hurt the NRA. And also, for the first time ever in the 2018 midterm elections, the NRA was outspent by the gun safety organizations. And that had never happened before in a nationwide election. And even in this election, the 2020 election just done, the NRA spent around $25 million in all. Not clear where they got that money from, but it was maybe a little more than a third of what they spent 4 years ago. So clearly they didn't have and don't have those kind of resources. And when you think about the Attorney General's office in New York and then kind of the NRA fleeing from New York, I mean, it's hard, it may seem odd to say it, but in many ways, Letitia James, New York's Attorney General, is a good friend to the average NRA dues-paying member, because she's pointed out that the NRA leaders have taken that money and done everything but promote the interest of gun rights, much less hunting, sporting, and other traditional activities.
I was kind of curious as well. I work for a TV news organization, but the NRA also, ventured into that area with NRA TV. It's since been, shut down. But how rare is that for a powerful lobby like a gun rights lobby to kind of venture into the media space like that? They really put a lot of emphasis on that. Do you see that as somewhat responsible for the financial situation they're in at the moment?
It did contribute to the NRA's financial woes, there's no doubt. NRA TV was the brainchild of Ackerman McQueen, which was the public relations firm that the NRA has had a very close relationship with for 30 years or more. And a lot of the NRA's sort of big publicity campaigns came from Ackerman McQueen. The NRA has been Ackerman McQueen's chief client for these many years, but they paid Ackerman McQueen a ton of money. In 2017, for example, they paid him $40 million for 1 year, and that's probably the kind of money that the NRA paid Ackerman McQueen in previous years as well. And NRA TV turned out to be a total bust. They had no viewers. It was a money sinkhole, and they finally pulled the plug on it in 2019. And of course, Ackerman McQueen was sued by the NRA, and Ackerman McQueen countersued. That is still in the courts, and they've had this acrimonious and very expensive breakup. And just the legal fees alone have accounted for some of the NRA's woes. And in fact, Wayne LaPierre reported to the NRA's board last year that the NRA had spent $100 million just in legal fees in the last 2 years.
Wow. In your research, talking to members of the NRA, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, what is their view of everything that is going on, and what alternatives do they have if they want to be a part of an organization that promotes, gun safety, gun rights, proponents of the Second Amendment, hunting, and the like, without kind of wading into all of those cultural issues that the NRA really, staked a lot of their claim on in the last few years? What are their alternatives?
Well, that's an important question, especially from the gun owner's point of view. I mean, certainly traditional hunting, sporting people, some of them I think were dismayed with the direction that the NRA took in recent years, becoming not only more political but more extremist. I think that turned off a certain number of traditional gun owners. And among those who have been loyal, certainly some have been attracted by that messaging. But I just don't think the NRA has helped itself. Obviously, it hasn't helped itself financially, and in terms of the public relations perspective for the NRA, I think it's taken a while for this kind of news to trickle down to the country as a whole, because it began as sort of an inside baseball story about the NRA and its problems. Certainly, the NRA didn't want to publicize that. But I think that the typical gun owner may well be looking to a different outlet. Pretty much every state has its own state gun rights organization. There are other national gun rights organizations. None of them, although, are really of the size or tradition or reputation of the NRA. I mean, it's not clear at all that the NRA is going to survive in any shape or form that we know, in the way of that we know of it today. The people out in the country are still there. People are still interested in gun habits, gun activities, and in gun rights. And I think we're going to find that the NRA will probably survive in some kind of form, but it's going to be very different from the way it's been known up until now. And other kinds of gun groups are likely to prove to be beneficiaries in the long run.
No, wow, that's quite stunning, especially the power that the NRA does yield. It's the oldest, organization of its type in the country. Today, declaring bankruptcy. So we want to thank you for joining us here on News Now from Fox, Professor Spitzer. And just wanted to mention your new edition of your book as well, The Politics of Gun Control, recently out. So we thank you for joining us and have a good weekend. All right, that was my interview. Just